Joe.
So glad you're here, Joe.
Now the party is really officially begun. Yes, welcome to Beloved Community Radio. It's great to be with two people who have helped to grow this beloved community network, transitions community in all the ways that you have, and just so appreciative and inspired by the way in that you've been collaborating and then bringing in our sister friend Ingrid to kind of just grow this community of practice that's really being intentional about how we navigate conflict generatively. So just super happy to be with both of you. And I don't know if you were watching, Joe, but Liam asked me a question about like what are some of the core habit patterns that I'm seeing around conflict in the movement. We were sort of just talking about the core one. It's like, well, why are we afraid of conflict, and why are we averse to conflict, and why do we not like it? And I know for me, like I can say personally in my own life journey, my conflict aversion pattern has to do with two things. It has to do with like a fear of doing harm in the context of like power imbalances in which I may have more positional power than other people. And the flip side of that, which is like the belief that I don't have a right to boundaries. Mm-hmm. So those are my two root patterns. And those two root patterns are the root of my personal conflict aversion.
And so many other people too.
Yeah.
And
so
groups.
That's where it comes from for me. I don't know about you all, but yeah. So that's a quick thought on that question, Liam. Joe, welcome. How are you?
Hi, I'm good now. I'm happy to be with you all. Technology can be frustrating, but glad to be here.
You're a cool kid now. You made it into the Instagram live room, so this is where all the cool kids hang out, I'm told by my children. Yeah. So, yep.
Well, I have thoughts on that conversation you were just having, and in what you shared, Taj, I think you touched on something that I think is a core thread, which is that power in our world has been used to harm, and at like structural to very personal ways, structural, systemic, collective, intergenerational, hundreds of years, and then also for many of us in our personal lives, and so I think in whatever ways that happened for us in our family stories and ancestral stories, that there's a hesitation to embody the power that we have, and to claim the power that we have because power has been used against us. And so it can be hard to find a sense of owning power in a way that is mutually life-affirming.
Yeah, and just to say, like, as animals, when we perceive unpleasant sensation in our body, which is what happens in conflict and in instances of hurt and harm, our whole wiring is telling us there's danger. Like, it's like, get us out of here. Like, let's make this stop, either like forcibly or by running away or by just hiding. And so it's like, it goes against all of our evolutionary animal brain parts to turn towards that discomfort, and when you have, like, on an individual level, let alone like a group level, and then Joe and I talk a lot in our workshops around sort of like harm can be a result of conflict, and it's always a result of abuse and structural violence. So for all of us who experience structural and interpersonal and multi-generational violence, that is signaling to us like, this might be happening, beware, and so there can be this kind of confusion around like, well, the tactics. Like, does that mean I need to respond the way I would respond to structural violence or interpersonal abuse? And I think we're seeing the result of that, that murkiness, in people taking really big responses to just regular conflict.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of, there's a couple places I'm drawn at with those last reflections. So one is like, you know, we are in a community. The heart of this work of beloved community is this notion of like, there's no one outside of the circle of care. There's no one outside of the circle that we're trying to mend relationship and repair relationship and bring balance in a way that leaves all under heaven intact, as we often talk about. And I think what I felt a little bit what you were sharing, Weyam, is that there can be a way in which, as human beings and in communities, when we're trying to navigate a polarity, we can sometimes, if we're at one end of the polarity, the first thing we do to come into balance is we sort of go to the other end of the polarity. We swing to the other side before we can kind of like find our balance in it. So just curious, as you've been doing work with folks around this, and you can say, okay, well, there's conflict avoidance, and then there's, you know, for lack of a better word, like cancel culture, right? Like we are pushing you outside of the circle beyond redemption, right? So there's ways in which like neither one of those things serve us terribly well. And in a moment in which there's so much polarization and so much swing in the binary from one end to the other, like what are you finding as you're working with folks are the things that are helping folks sort of individually in their groups kind of find that balance within the polarity?
Well, one thing I would say is that actually that urge to cancel someone and push them outside the circle is also conflict avoidance. It's a way of like pushing the conflict away.
And you miss the opportunity to like actually uncover the wisdom of the wound because you've just like pushed away the cause. But that's like not a way to live, right? To like organize your whole life so that you never have to touch that pain of like your need not being met or someone hurting you. But also I do want to continuously tease apart that like in abusive situations, consequences are necessary and unplatforming people is necessary. And those kinds of really extreme boundaries that sometimes get labeled as in a bad way as cancel culture are needed and necessary, especially given that like the carceral system doesn't do us justice, you know, so like we do have to create those firm boundaries in our own communities.
Yeah, as you say that, I'm reminded, you know, there's a way in which like as we're trying to find balance and trying to find like what's true for us and in our experience, like if you're a little bit off, you're all the way off. Like if it's a little bit not true, it's kind of all the way not true. And this is an area where I think there's a lot of sort of, I don't want to say like skill and nuance is required to navigate through that complexity and all of that gray area. And I think one of the things I'm appreciating about the resources that you've pulled together, the workshops that you're doing with folks, some of the other practitioners doing this work who you've, you know, lifted up and are whose work you're kind of leaning into, is that what I appreciate about all of that is there's a real sense of like the nuance and the complexity and the work that it takes to sort of stay with it when it's murky, to try to sort of find that, you know, find that spot. So yeah, just an appreciation to you all in that. And yeah, curious. Oh, I have so many questions. I'm gonna jump back. I'm gonna jump ahead and jump back. So, you know, in the work that we've been doing in this Transitions Beloved Community network over many years, there was a moment in which we kind of came to some four essential ideas, right? And you know, vision and embodiment and connection and like navigation. And then from there, like the place that we went from there as a community was about the intersection of power and pain, of harm and trauma. So the sort of deep democracy, beloved community wheel is all about like what happens at that intersection and the nature of that intersection. So I was just reminded, Joe, as you were talking about our relationships to power and our relationships to harm, that in many ways, I feel like the work that you all are doing is like a very, very deep dive into the wisdom, insights, and practices that are right at that intersection of the deep democracy wheel. And we had one of these conversations right shortly after Bell Hooks transitioned, and so it was a moment of like bringing up a lot of her insight and wisdom and teaching about like what happens at that intersection. And I just, you know, always such an appreciation for her, but I think you know, deepened and renewed appreciation with her passing and in this moment. But like, what do you feel like you know now about the wisdom at this intersection that you didn't know maybe like when some of us were in the room and there was a conflict going on and no one knew what to do? So just to say, like, you know, your insights are hard earned, because for those of you watching, the three of us have been in the room where there are many a conflict occurring, and, you know, sometimes we did well resolving those conflicts and sometimes we did horribly resolving those conflicts. So I just, you know, just what do you feel like you know now that you didn't know before? And is it something different, or is it just sort of a more nuanced understanding of something you already knew? Like you just peeled the onion like 10 more layers. Like what is this deep dive at this heart of the intersection like brought into your life? What new wisdom, what new insight?
I'm going to yield to you, Joe. I feel like there's a lot that you've shared with me around that question.
Yeah. Well, the first thought that arises for me as a white person doing this work is to be more conscious and explicit about race and power, and I mean, I guess in all the ways, not just explicit and conscious about race, but explicit and conscious about all forms of power expression, power dynamics, and to not be afraid to talk about them directly, including when like I have no idea what to do here. And like this is what I'm noticing, that, you know, even when we don't know, you know, you were talking to earlier, Taj, like finding the sweet spot, and so even if we feel like we're way far away from the sweet spot, just even to name that, and you know, that especially in a context where there is shared purpose and there is mutual commitment, to trust that together we'll find that when we are able to be honest with ourselves.
Right. Because like so much of structural power that's coercive is about it being so insidious and invisible and under like controlling everything, but not explicitly all the time. And so to be able to be like, to explicitly name those things can be not always healing, but at least like the opposite of gaslighting. Like, yeah, you know, like in there's always power at play. So like, and positional power and race and gender and sexuality and all the things, class. And then like, so in an interaction in a like, you know, collegial or like organizing or whatever environment between two people, with all of those factors at play, like every interaction could have conflict on multiple levels. And you don't know, like to just some like automatically race and power is there. And so like if you don't name it, it's like it's painful, you know, because the other person maybe who doesn't have access to that kind of power on that axis is going to feel like that's what's at play, and it may be that plus something else.
Yeah. And that's definitely a place, I think, why I started with race and power is that what you just named, Weyam, is exactly where I've made mistakes before, where I wasn't conscious as a white person of how race was at play in the dynamic and impacting someone else. And so that's one thing, is I've learned to be much more conscious of that, to track that more actively. And another thing that is like a newer insight for me, just within the last 6 months or so, is that when I really focus on my own accountability, to my own, like what I am responsible for, and owning my responsibility, that I become less concerned about whether others are being accountable. And I have a more grounded and relational sense of my own power. And like, yeah, when to lean in and when to let go, and those kinds of things.
Wow. So you've just sparked like 50 different questions. I'm just gonna share a bunch of them. So one, it's like, it is so important for us as humans to be like heard, seen, and acknowledged, and especially where there are shadows at play, when there are things, as you talk about, in the iceberg that are unnamed, unseen, and unacknowledged. And so what I'm really hearing is the most important thing we can do is to just sort of say the thing that's unsaid, name the thing that's unnameable, and make sure that folks who've experienced difficulty in a conflict are fully seen, heard, and acknowledged. And that is an important starting place before we do everything else. And the thing that immediately I thought of after that was like, well, and I've been in a situation in which like conflict is complex. There might be like 3 or 4 things going on. And I've made the mistake of like, in trying to name all the things that are going on, I think I've invalidated other people's core experience, because by naming all of the things going on, it can sometimes feel like a validation of like, or a justification, or like, and so I'm just like, wait, no, okay, let me not do, stop, just, no, that's not helpful. And sometimes it's like, okay, there may be 10 things going on here, but there's one thing that needs to be like really acknowledged, and it's important that we just say that one thing and not say anything else, because if you say anything else, it's going to feel like an unacknowledgement, or like it's, so that's like, I would say one of my lessons of like, oh, I thought it was good, like we'll just name all, nope, stop, not helpful, stop, rewind. So anyway, I'll pause there. I have 15 other questions, but like any insights on any of that stuff?
I'm just resonating.
Yeah. Okay. So taking accountability, radical self-accountability, right? Because I know for myself, like one of the things I have to release on a consistent, regular spiritual basis is my desire to control the behavior of other people. And usually it's my desire to control the behavior of other people who I perceive are doing harm. So there's a paradox in that like we can interrupt harm, like harm is happening and you know, like, oh, there's someone in the street, they're going to get hit by a car. You help them get out of the way so they don't get hit by a car. Like human, yeah, there's harm occurring. If you're in a position, interrupt the harm. And we can't control anyone else's behavior. And when I try to, I'm going to get myself in a whole lot of trouble. So there's an interesting paradox there of like, for me, the polarity of like under responsibility and over responsibility, and that sweet spot of like radical self accountability, self responsibility, where I'm not like leaving things off the table that are really mine to hold, and I'm not taking on stuff that's not mine to hold. And how do I help me? Help me. Help us. How do we find the sweet spot in that? Because I think that's one of the places where I've gone from one side to the other and around in circles. And yeah. Any guidance on that one?
I mean, I'm with you. And I've definitely experienced that pendulum. And I don't know if I have guidance so much as just like you've named exactly what I think our collective question is, and like practice edge is learning edge. Yeah. Well, how about you, Weyam?
On a personal level, yeah, just like the importance of boundaries, like it's so cliche, but it's like the most important thing in my life right now. And I've taken to doing like a daily end of the day sort of a like cleanup where energetically, if I just check in with myself and I'm like, is there stuff that I've taken on that belongs to other people today? And just like sort of imagining energetically giving it to them back as a gift, and asking like myself, are there ways I've, gone beyond what's in my own sphere of influence, and what's mine to account for? And if so, I literally like energetically call myself back from those relationships, from those interactions on a daily basis, because I got to stay really clean right now, in just like in my own, the ways I'm supporting my family and community, and also like in the work that I'm doing.
Ooh, that's so powerful. I think
yeah, I love that quote by Prentice Hemphill that you just shared. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously.
It reminds me of our friends Omar and Belinda, who do this work around gratitude as like a core practice for transformation. And I think there are a lot of people who have found a lot of value in having a daily gratitude practice. But Liam, I think this is the first time I've heard of like thinking about boundaries as a like opening or closing reflective practice in the day in the way that you've described. And as someone for whom that is my core challenge, I'm going to take your guidance on that one, and I'm going to give that one a try, because the gratitude practice has been so like, that is in the midst of intense suffering, finding gratitude right in the heart of the discomfort, like right in the heart of the thing that is most painful, like that, finding the joy in the midst of the deepest suffering, that has been my core practice for the last few years. And so, but if I follow your lead, send me some notes on that, because I'm going to have to try that out, because I think that might be the next few years for me. Is like what you just laid out. That is, thank you for that. That is, whew. And go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hearing that, sparked for me that, I think we internally know, like, Taj, when you were talking about the pendulum and finding the sweet spot, like there are so many reasons that our intuition or sense or, embodied knowing might be obscured or distorted. But if we tune into it, that it is, we can come to clarity. And what you described, Weyam, as a practice for cultivating that clarity on a more regular basis. And just that practice of internal listening, I think, is really beautiful.
I just want to name that I adopted that practice from a couple different lineages. A book called The Voices of Our Ancestors, that's from the Tsalagi Cherokee lineage, and then one of my spiritual and somatic healing teachers, Githanjali Hemp.
Thank you for calling in the lineage and the teachers. And I think one of the things I'm really appreciating about the work that you both are doing is you're both bringing your contributions, the contributions of the communities that you're a part of, and you're lifting up so many other wonderful teachers and practitioners who are doing this work. And so if folks go into the comments here and look at all the materials that Weyam and Jo have been pulling together, you're going to find a treasure trove of stories and practices and teachers and different ways that people are tackling this problem. So just appreciating the ways in which you all are doing this in a very beloved community way. But to follow up, Weyam, can you just share a little about the work that you're doing? Because I mean, when you said like you need to kind of keep yourself clear in order to support yourself, in order to support your community, in order to support the folks you're supporting, right? Can you say a little bit about like why that's important, what kind of work you're doing, and why that keeping yourself kind of centered and clear is so critical right now and what you're up to?
Yeah, so on a sort of like purpose work in the world service area, I've been supporting different movement groups and nonprofits in building skills around conflict and like flexing these muscles of like, how do I turn towards discomfort? How do we name the elephant in the room? How do we give each other proactive feedback so that to minimize the incidents of conflict before they erupt? And yeah, so I'm doing that for all kinds of different groups in climate justice and racial equity and reproductive justice and all sorts of intersections of that work. And then on a personal level, like I recently lost a friend to suicide, and a close person to me in my life is struggling with that particular kind of suffering. And I became very clear that had I been more, and there's a lot of self-forgiveness and compassion and I can't control blah, blah, blah. And had I been more exquisitely like tending to the boundaries that allow me to love others, I could have been available in a crucial point for that friend who left. And like, that's been one of the biggest, like sort of earth-shattering lessons of my life right now. And I'm getting a redo with this close person to me. And to be able to show up for them in the ways that they need, I have to like be so good about the boundary. And then of course in the conflict trainings and stuff, like so much comes up because there's one-on-ones with people and you get to hear a lot of like what they're going through. And it's not like I have to be very clear about what I can offer and the kinds of containers so that, so that I'm not like overreaching in any of that and causing inadvertent harm by overextending myself and by making things weird for other people.
Yeah, I'm really, really sorry for the loss of your friend, and these are such hard times. As you know, I have two young children, 14 and 17. One about to go to college, one about to go to high school, and the 14-year-old, two of her peers have attempted suicide in the last couple months, right? And that's both been hard for her and obviously hard for those young people. And she herself felt a sense of like responsibility, like, oh, my friend reached out to me and I could, I feel like was I there and could I have made a difference, in some sense of like, was she, like if she had been more available as a friend, like would it have made a difference, and she's struggling with the stuff that she's struggling with as a kid. And I think, I really feel that sense. Like when I was a kid and still now, like I often feel like I should be able to fix it, present it, and this goes back to the thing about the tricky balance between the under accountability and the over accountability, because I tend to overestimate the power that I have to have an impact, like because I want so badly to have agency, even in places where I have very little. And so the heartbreak of the loss combined with the heartbreak, that conflict of feeling like, I wish I could have done more. I wish I could be able to do more and all of that. And I think, there's a way in which what I also resonate with is like all of that energy, I'm going to take that and I'm going to focus that energy into my practice and into grace and into, just my ability to just show up more for myself and everyone else, and try to release whatever kind of shame or guilt I may be holding, because not helpful for any in past, present, future, in any of the multiverse, not ever helpful. So actively releasing that, whoo, oh my goodness, that it's a lot right now. It's a lot right now. And I think I got two.
Well, can I say,
yes, please.
like, this is making me think of how this is also applicable to groups, right? And Joe, you talk about this a lot, where it's like, I feel like, on the one hand, on a sort of abstract level, we as humans have vast infinite capacity, like on that sort of most sort of spiritual part of us, and right, the limited capacity of these bodies, of our time, of our resources. And so, like, on an interpersonal level, like, how do I create the structures in my life to be most available to myself and my near and dear ones? And then, like, in terms of with groups, like, there's a similar sort of with navigating that has to happen, and like discernment that happens in articulating your specific purpose, and like getting clear on what you are doing as a group and what you're not doing. And conflict can be a way to surface that. And there doesn't have to be shame in creating that sense of discernment. In fact, it allows you to be like more effective, and we have to trust that other people will be doing the other things that you aren't doing. So what are you most in alignment in your group able to do together?
It's such a powerful articulation of the ways in which, like, trying to do more than maybe we should, or trying to do more than we can create difficulty for ourselves and difficulty for others. And just the liberation that can happen when we're clear on our purpose and clear on our focus. It really creates space and room for other people to be clear, and for everyone to kind of bring their individual and collective gifts to the shared purpose. Yeah, definitely feeling that. I'm curious for both of you, like, in doing this work, if you can think of a time where there was like a conflict you thought could be resolved, but it couldn't figure out how to do it. And then one that, like, you were like, this is impossible, and somehow the group like figured it out. And like, what did you learn? Any stories come to mind with that prompt? And obviously you can leave out all the details and just give us the insights gained. But yeah, what's happened that's been unexpected?
Well, on the first question, a conflict I really, or what I searching for words, a place where I wanted to be able to resolve conflict, but ended up having to actually walk away, was in a situation that I think was probably closer to an abusive dynamic than an actual, like, tension where there was something to unearth together. And I want to name that because that's one of the patterns of abuse, is that the person who is in that dynamic position with less power often is like really committed actually to the relationship and wanting to work it out. And so they'll often claim more responsibility than they rightly hold in that dynamic. And that's a situation where actually a boundary is needed. And certainly was for me.
Curious if there was like, how did you come to the realization of like the distinction? Because it was like, oh, is it this? Is it that? Oh, it's that. Like it was fuzzy. I was trying. Oh, like you was there support that you got that helped you to see that, or was it just sort of, I've seen this pattern enough. I recognized it. Like what made the difference?
It escalated to the point where the other person did something that was so egregious I couldn't deny any longer.
So they made clear what it was through their behavior, right? Okay. Yeah, that is unfortunate, but it was clear.
Yes.
See you later, alligator. After a while, crocodile. I'm out. I'm done. I'm through. I'm not. Nope. See ya. Woo. Which can also be heartbreakingly painful because we care about people. We want the best for us and them. And the fact that someone may be abusive doesn't mean we don't actually care for them, which means walking away can still be very painful, even if it's the best thing for everyone. And I think that's sort of the complexity in all of this that we got to just help each other to hold. Like none of this stuff, it's all so messy. Ooh, it's messy.
Yeah. And that's one of the beautiful things about, experiments, all the different models that have been popping up of community accountability and that if we can ask each other for support in making those assessments and also holding those boundaries. I at that point in my life didn't know I had those resources available. I'm
curious your thoughts on this, but I'm going to tell a short story to follow up on what you just shared, Joe, because I just recently connected yesterday with a dear friend who I haven't spoken to in a long time. And we had a challenge and there was some difficult stuff. And I kind of just sort of stepped back from the relationship, but without really acknowledging why or sort of closing it. And so this friend, and it's someone who I love very dearly and have always loved. And even in that moment of stepping back, I was like, I love this person so much and they are amazing. And I just need to step back from this. But I don't even have the resources right now to kind of just sort of close it with intention. Yeah. And we were talking yesterday because they reached out and we had a wonderful conversation and we were talking about, just reconnecting and what happened and reflecting back. And what I realized was like, because they said, well, what would have happened in that moment if we had been able to kind of just have some intention and just be clear, like, hey, we may not be able to take care of this right now, but we're going to step back and we'll check back in, whatever. And like, we could have gotten support. And what I realized was like, oh, wow. In that moment, I felt like I was providing support to a lot of other people, but I didn't feel like there was anyone I could have turned to for support. I felt very alone and isolated in that moment, which was part of why I stepped back from that relationship, because I was really overwhelmed with a lot of things and not feeling that I had anyone to turn to for support. And it was sort of like very poignant, because it was like, they are a person that I would have turned to for support. You know what I mean? But we were in a conflict, so I couldn't turn to them for support. And so it just made me realize, how painful it is to feel isolated. For those of us who've experienced loss by suicide, it's like sometimes we have, friends and family who are struggling, they're visibly struggling, they're getting support, and it just becomes unbearable. And sometimes it's like no one had any idea.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're so, right? And anyway, whew. So just wanted to offer that. Weyam, thoughts, stories, reflections?
What comes to mind as you share that is just this sense of like, yeah, like what, I don't know, like I have these it's paradox. I have this belief that there is enough support in the world. Somewhere, someone, something can support whatever thing is happening at any given moment. And then in those acute moments, it's sometimes it's like not yet here. Like it could be here, but those moments are like when you need it and it's not there, and it's just so painful, and it's the new support hasn't yet come in. And yeah, I don't really have like an answer, but just to name that is something I've experienced and loved ones have been experiencing, especially as we're entering these more and more challenging times. And yeah, like what are the pathways to find that support that is there? And sometimes it's the mental construct, like the friend of mine who passed had. Now we're all connected on WhatsApp, like 100 people in his inner circle who would have been there, had he just given us like the full story of what was going on. And it was this sense of almost like protecting us, or like taking over responsibility for his wellness. Like he should be able to do it himself.
Well, I'm having flashbacks now to circles that Joe and I have been in, where everyone in the circle was like, I didn't say that because I was overly caretaking for everyone else in the group. And we're all there sitting in the circle and no one's saying what they need because everyone's worried that like no one wants to burden everybody else with their need because everyone can see how burdened everyone else is. And so there's a sense of like, we're all connected, but everyone's struggling, and there's a sense of scarcity. And I don't want to put this on you. Right. And I know for me, that's one of my other core issues. Like this conversation yesterday just reminded me that like the support is there. And I've had the experience of like, even when I'm afraid to, even when I don't want to be a burden, when I ask for it, it's abundant. Like it's all around me. But if I'm willing to receive it, if I'm willing to be vulnerable enough to name it, and if I'm willing to not like be caretaking for all the people who I'm caretaking for, right?
And
like,
if you're willing
not wanting to burden them with my problems or whatever. Yeah.
And then if you're willing to be discerning about who's saying they don't have capacity and honoring that, and not like being in despair about it, but just like allowing that to then make space for who does have capacity to hold that. Again, boundaries, so profound and yet so central.
Yeah, and as what you're describing in this WhatsApp example, like there's a your friend had a very dense network of love and community, and there would have been somebody in there, right? Like maybe half the group's busy with their kids or their whatever, their like, but it was there, and I think that may be true for more of us more of the time than we realize. There are definitely folks who are isolated, like who are really genuinely isolated, profoundly isolated. And that's like when I think about from a beloved community standpoint, what does it mean to be truly in a beloved community? It means like no one is isolated. Like we are like reaching out for each other and pulling each other in a way that like there's more than enough. We got more than like no one. We're not leaving anybody out. We're not leaving anybody just out there, right?
Well, and that our pathway of relationship to the non-human support of the earth and the cosmos is open too, not to get woo, but then it's like, okay, maybe there is not actually enough human support in this moment, but I am in enough like reciprocal relationship with the whole earth that I know I can find some kind of support somewhere.
That's been the key for my younger daughter. Like she's struggled a lot the last few years and is in a circle with some other young people and a mentor. and they spend every Wednesday out in with the redwood trees, and with the mushrooms, and with the doing things, and with our non-human relatives. And I would say, like, if the human support has been essential, but it has been the trees that have really like saved her to be quite honest, and to be in that relationship with the rest of our relatives in a group way, right? So yeah, that it does feel like a moment in which, like, we have to call in through this very painful and difficult unraveling portal, the collapse of the old and the emergence of the new. We're going to have to repair and call in all of our relationships to get through this, because the two-leggeds, we can't get through. We're not going to make it if we just turn it. We got to turn to each other for sure. But that's just one step. That's just the first step in that.
Yeah, and I think we're in a moment of collective remembrance that we are nature, like we are part of the earth, and that it's like a collective remembrance on that level, and then reckoning with centuries of harm on the other, and they go together. And I'm really grateful these days to be in community with folks who have an active practice around food and nourishment as part of that remembering of the relationships that we are embedded in always, and the fact that just all of the variables coming together that magically align to make it possible for us to be alive is astounding, and that we can actually like tune into those relationships and feed those relationships. And to me, that is the practice of beloved community. And maybe in any given moment, the most we can access of that sense of support is just the sense of gravity, or the sense of like, I'm going to take a bite of a strawberry and have gratitude for that plant that is nourishing me.
Yeah, everyone do that. It's spring equinox. The earth is just welcoming us with open arms today. I haven't been able to go deep into nature very often because I've been busy, but I just go talk to trees in my neighborhood. Like, truly, they, like, so many of them, not all of them, but many of them are just like, hey, I'm here. I'd love to be in relationship with you.
Yeah. And I think that just sort of be in conscious relationship, in relationship of like gratitude and acknowledgement, because we're always in relationship. We have so many relationships, and so many of those relationships are just unconscious. And so we're not bringing our curiosity, our care, our gratitude into those relationships. And the gratitude and the acknowledgement, it's like we all want to be acknowledged. We all want to be seen. We all want to be appreciated for what we bring to the web, for our unique contribution to the web. And so it is so powerful to start that dialogue in the ways that you describe. I just think, we're there. So, it's so much about what you're doing is like so deeply personal, so deeply interpersonal, and so fractal in so many ways, right? Because as we know, like the patterns that my conflict aversion and my over responsibility and all of those things that I carry around in this little sack, those patterns get reproduced in my familial relationships. They get reproduced in my community relationships. They get reproduced in the organizations and structures that I'm a part of, and they get reproduced within the macros, right? So, and then there's a sense of like, if we can heal and repair and transform at one level of a fractal system, then that can extend healing through the other layers of that system. Like the healing that my children do is healing for my parents, and the healing that my parents do is healing for me. And so when you have that shift in any part, it tends to propagate through. And you've been really attentive to kind of like, it's important to not just mush all that together, to kind of like confuse. Yes, it's fractal, but it's like we kind of have to have some attention to at what level of the process we're working in, because there's some dynamics that may be like specific to working at that level. So just curious if you have anything to offer on that in terms of, recent insights about, okay, like when we're working at this level, it's really important too, not confuse it with that. And yeah, any stories or reflections on that? Because it feels like it's a place where you're doing some important refinement of the practice.
One insight that I came across in Mickey Cashtan's book, The Highest Common Denominator, was like, there can be a group with the people with a lot of good self-regulation and interpersonal skills, and they are shit as a group. Like, they do not get anything done. They can't come to decisions together. And like, they have great like nonviolent communication or whatever, but so the piece around like none of that takes place of having like good decision making like processes and mechanisms and structures that are agile and supportive to your group, but that like can move you forward. So I'll just say that. I don't know, Joe, if you want to add anything to that.
I mean, a couple of things come to mind. One is just to contextualize in any interpersonal conflict, there are also structural dynamics, and like to give ourselves permission to talk about that is really, really helpful. And then the other thing that came to mind was I think connected to the earlier practice, Weyam, you offered around the inner listening, because given that we are nature, we are all connected, that inner listening, and like when we are attuned to the inner listening, we're attuned to the harmony of the whole web of relationships that we are a part of. And sometimes, so within the logic of like extractive capitalism, sometimes there's this false solution of consumer choice that's offered, and it doesn't have any real power because it's actually acting out the same logic of extraction. And what makes the personal practices have that greater fractal impact is when we are attuned to the harmony that we all exist within, because that's how it builds momentum and ripples out.
That's so powerful. I think what both of you sort of like, you named two different layers in their relationship. So Weyam, the sort of individual interpersonal skills does not translate into effective group practice, and it is not a replacement for having building a strong and intentional group culture. Both of those are necessary, but they're distinct and related pieces of work. And Joe, sort of the structural and the interpersonal are distinct, but they're always present.
They interact.
In conflict. So you have to name both and sort them out. So it's kind of like we need to make these distinctions are important, and the nature of the relationship is really important. But again, going back to some of your very early insight, like the important thing is that we can talk about. The important thing is that it's visible. It's the important thing is like we're kind of seeing what's under the iceberg, and we can name it, we can work through it, even if it's not clear, even if it's complicated, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's messy, like we can face it. and just face it the best that we can. So again, just seeing the ways in which you all are in this broader community of practice, like finding these really critical distinctions and refinements. Because I think that, in building, like the funny thing when we first started getting pulled into this collectively, into this like conflict transformation work, and everyone's like, oh, here's my framework for conflict transformation and how well we do it. I was like, the framework you just laid out for conflict transformation, like those are just the characteristics of like a healthy functioning group, right? So it's like, okay, are we focusing on the habit we're trying to interrupt or the practices we're trying to cultivate in order to create the culture that's a healthy culture? And it doesn't matter whether you come in through the conflict side or come in through the habit conflict side or come in through the practice culture side, you're going to end up doing this. If you're doing something that works, you're going to end up in the same place. So just come in whatever door is closest or open, and then just get in the room and do the work.
And to see the conflict as a portal to that,
to
that what needs to be built, what needs to exist, that doesn't yet, that pain pointing to what needs haven't been met that can be met in new ways.
Yeah. As we get close to wrapping up this conversation, because the other thing I learned from Instagram is after an hour they just cut you off. So we have a few moments left. But I'm going to end us with what I see as like one of the bigger conflict puzzles that I'm seeing, and it has to do with like this Tibetan Buddhist concept of like the far enemy and the near enemy. So the near enemy of love is attachment, because it looks a lot like love, but it's not love. And so though it's close, it's 1,000 miles away. And the far enemies are easier to see and navigate because they're clearly the opposite of the thing. Like, oh, fear and domination and hatred. Like, you're not going to confuse that with love. Attachment and love, easy to confuse one thing to the other, which is exactly where this kind of like nuanced wisdom and subtle practice is so important, that we don't get confused one thing for the other. So here is a conflict I see playing out at every level right now that I would love to get your insight on. So there is this relationship between the I and the we, right? And this relationship between like sovereignty and interconnection and interdependence, right?
Yeah.
And there's a thing happening in the culture right now where some folks are using almost the exact same words, but what they mean is like very, very different. And here's my analysis, forgive me, Norma, of what I'm observing, which is that like there's a notion of sovereignty that has a lot of autonomous individual white supremacy in it. So when you attach that notion of sovereignty to a notion of interdependence and interconnection, it cancels out the interconnection and interdependence. Because really what you're saying is, I'm a separate self, separate from life, and so therefore the boundaries of my sovereignty end at the, right? Which on a boundaries and protection basis, it's like there's a way in which that is fundamentally and irrevocably true, which is why it's such a tricky paradox to fall right into the middle of, because it's not one or the other. It's like yes and yes and yes, but what you're saying and what you're saying are dramatically different, because that virus kills Black people more than it kills any other people.
I was gonna say, you're talking about the vaccine. Like, I was like, what is Taj talking?
That's what I'm saying. I said it. But you got a lot of white supremacy into your bodily sovereignty concept, and I think like there's ways in which there are algorithms designed to identify paradoxes and to manipulate our consciousness right at the confusing point of that paradox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's like a whole,
because that's where the energy is.
There's a whole apparatus in place that's like creating confusion at a point of paradox.
Yeah. I think
creating confusion at a point. Yeah. So how do we resolve this conflict? What do we do?
I mean, I think I'm not the guy to do that, but like I think like what's happening, and this is articulated in that book, Conflict versus Abuse, is like there's just a way that it's not power aware. Like that particular form of sovereignty is like actively harming the collective, and specifically people who've experienced structural oppression. And so it's not actually what it says it's doing. And so just like, I don't know, that the importance of naming that, you know, like, because like a different example could be someone who's a colonizer experiencing being attacked by an indigenous like resistance movement and feeling like, oh, I have an experience of oppression that's happening here. And it's like, well, you're not really seeing the bigger picture of like who's taking whose sovereignty really. So something about zooming out and naming like what the actual power and impact is.
Not power aware. That's it right there, Joe. Any thoughts on this little conundrum here?
I completely agree that it's about power, and I think like I'm going back to where we started the conversation, that when we're afraid to embody our own power, then we don't have actually an answer to this paradox. And there's a really wonderful book that's called The Power Manual by Cindy Suarez.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And she says that like power skills are learnable, and that we power, the nature of power is it is relational, because it plays out in interactions, and that we need to focus on effective and mutually affirming interactions as how we build and express power. So I don't have an answer to the paradox you named, but I think that's the way to find the answer.
Yeah, no, I think both of you have given really wise and skillful guidance on this question, which I will be reflecting on quite a bit.
Well, it also reminds me of like what Norma says about like in like reparations and accountability can't be forced, or else someone feels oppressed, even though in the bigger scheme of things it's reparations, not oppression. And so like, yeah, I don't know, there's a way that one can't, like, it doesn't do any good to use coercive power than to try to make someone be different, even if it's in the sake of justice.
Yeah. Wisdom for both of you. Well, I want to say how grateful I am that we were able to spend a little of our Sunday afternoon together and with some other friends in the community here, and just to give each of you an opportunity to kind of share anything about how we can support you in the work that you're doing, how we can support you as human beings, how we can support you as members of this community, how we can support you in relationship to the purpose that you carry and the roles that you're playing. Like, how can we support you?
Joe, do you want to go first?
Thank you for that question. I don't know that I have an answer. I guess, I mean, one thing I haven't specifically shared, the main place that I'm focusing in my purpose work these days is around community of folks who are doing food cultural work, and using that as the portal to reattuning to the web of relationships that we are part of in our lives. So that is through an organization that's currently called Real Food, Real Stories, and we are right now searching for a new name. So we're in the process of generating that together. So that's one thing, is to invite folks to tune into that work. And there's a variety of ways to do that, but you can find that all online.
It's a beautiful and tasty work, Joe. And I think, as you were alluding to before, like, one of the ways that we reconnect to the web of life is through our relationship to food and agriculture, and good food, real food, cultural food, sustaining food. You know, there's a lot of transformation to be had right at that intersection. So thank you for the work you're doing, and I dropped a link in the comments there for folks to find out more. Weyam, how about you? How can we support you?
I am most supported by everyone taking care of themselves.
Go outside and say hi to the trees.
Say hi to the trees today, please do. I'm thinking about developing some kind of boundaries for brown people community or workshop series or something, maybe with my sibling. And so if you want to like learn about that or influence or co-create that, maybe folks could add me on Instagram at Weyam Healing.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Brown and boundaried. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Hey, Aisha. Well, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to say thank you, and until next month, we will sign off for this monthly, every third Tuesday, Beloved Community Radio conversation. And if both of you have a little more time, we'll have a little after party, and maybe Aisha will jump in, and we can say hi to Aisha and some of the folks who are here, and you can just have a little champagne, a little virtual champagne on our Sunday afternoon brunch here. So
thanks, Taj. It's been such a delight.
Yeah, so good to be with you both. So much love.
Yeah. Thank you both.
All right, see you at the after party.
All right.